Ladies and gentlemen of South Florida, may I have your attention, please? Playoffs.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into this Wednesday, April 12th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez. You can follow me on Twitter at MoneyMan12. Follow the show account on Twitter as well at LO_FLA Panthers and on Instagram as well. We're starting to gain a little bit of traction on the Instagram front, so make sure to follow the show also on Instagram, and also give us a follow on our YouTube channel as well, and follow the podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. So, Cats fans, as I literally have my cat right here as she jumps on my desk. Cats fans, what a ride. What a result that we saw on Tuesday night with both the Buffalo Sabres and the Pittsburgh Penguins losing in regulation, which those results, even though I said yesterday with my guest Francisco Porta that I didn't think that the Chicago Blackhawks were going to find a way to beat Pittsburgh to help the Florida Panthers clinch a playoff spot. But it happened, and the Florida Panthers are in, and it's all and more importantly, it is a Winans Wednesday edition of the show, which means Jacob Winans is back for another edition. And Jacob, how are you feeling, my friend?
I am feeling absolutely fantastic. It's a pleasure to be here again. I love when I'm able to come on after a win, but in tonight's case, it's a win without the Panthers playing a game. And I am very happy to third wheel tonight with you and Shadow there. I'm a very happy third wheel. I love seeing Shadow make an appearance.
Yeah, I once again I got a YouTube commenter saying that we need more of the appearances on the show for that. But let's just talk about just with the scenarios going into the night. And it would have been very difficult had the Buffalo Sabres and Pittsburgh Penguins won their games. I tweeted this before the games even started that if both of them won, that there would be not a single scenario on Wednesday night, regardless of what happens with Habs and Islanders on Wednesday, that would have the Florida Panthers get into a spot and that we would have to wait until Thursday. And with these results, we don't have to sit here and wait. And it's not a long 3 days for the Panthers to do something, and then the feeling of having their backs against the wall as well with the Florida Panthers welcoming Carolina. Let's just go over some of the results from the night to begin with. Buffalo eliminated from playoff contention after losing to New Jersey Devils and the Carolina Hurricanes, where they won their game against the Detroit Red Wings on the night 4-1, which the Carolina Hurricanes are still a point ahead, and they need to win outright to win the Metro Division. So that changes everything as far as Florida's matchup. But the one we didn't expect, the one where caught us all off guard, was the Chicago Blackhawks versus the Pittsburgh Penguins. 1-0 in the middle of the second period. The Pittsburgh Penguins had not one, not two, but 3 power plays opportunities in the third period to try to make something happen. And they did get a power play goal by Gino Malkin to tie at 1. But then Buddy Robinson of the Chicago Blackhawks, I'm not going to pretend I know who he is, gets the go-ahead goal for the Blackhawks at the time. And then the Chicago Blackhawks score 3 unanswered to really make this in doubt, as even at one point the Pittsburgh Penguins had a 6-on-4 on the power play, but still the desperate times came for desperate measures, and the Chicago Blackhawks, even though they're tanking for Connor Bedard, and it goes to show players don't tank, front offices do. But also they're also playing for Jonathan Toews, who might be playing his last bit of hockey in a Blackhawks uniform. So it meant a few things to both sides. But all in all, it helps the Florida Panthers get into this position of clinching and punching their ticket to the Stanley Cup playoffs for a 4th year in a row, which is a franchise record for streaks. Before that, the Florida Panthers had only made it 5 times. And now it's 4 straight years in the dance. It's pure joy, Jacob. I'm excited, happy. Name any adjective as far as positive ones in the English dictionary. And that's what I'm feeling right now. Floor is yours, my friend.
Yeah, man, there's a lot to unpack there. It's really pretty remarkable. I want to start with, before we go into all the things that had to go right for the Panthers to get in tonight, I just want to start with this team and the Panthers and what they've overcome and what they've been faced with this year. If you take it all the way back to last offseason, the Matthew Tkachuk trade absolutely rocked this team to its core. When the longest tenured player, Jonathan Huberdeau, is shipped out,
Yes.
Mackenzie Weegar goes with him. A first-round pick goes with them. Cole Schwint as well. It was a really, really big franchise-altering move, and there were a lot of question marks surrounding that. Matthew Tkachuk has been the heart and soul of this team. On the ice, off the ice, he has been as advertised and even better. So the biggest amount of credit goes to him right off the top. He should, without a doubt, be a top 3 finalist for the Hart Trophy this season. That's a given. The goaltending, challenges in net with Bob dealing with some injuries, some illnesses, Spencer Knight dealing with the player assistance program that he's still currently working his way through. Alex Lyon coming out of nowhere to essentially save the season. No one could have seen that coming, and credit is due there. The guys stepping up and scoring at big times, and players playing above their usual lines, guys like Ryan Lomberg, who was last season a frequent healthy scratch, for being honest. He wasn't an everyday player, and now manning the third line consistently. And there's just been a lot of guys who have stepped up. Brandon Montour almost doubling his production, his average production from the past 2 seasons. It's really been remarkable to see how many guys have stepped up, and the Panthers are still not at 100% because we're waiting on Sam Bennett to come back. And now that we are in the playoffs, you can maybe afford to let him sit out the last game and hopefully bring him back as close to full health as possible for game 1 of the playoffs. But this is a team that has overcome so much to get to the playoffs in a year that was supposed to be a down year, was supposed to be a year that we're cap strapped and not supposed to really compete or contend. They still find a way to get in. Credit goes to Bill Zito for not completely folding at the trade deadline when everything was saying this is probably not the year, it's time to sell. He didn't sell. He believed in this team. The players believed in themselves, and this is the payoff. And I think going into the playoffs, we're not going to talk really who we'd rather see and all that tonight. But I think it doesn't really matter who lines up against the Panthers. This is a team that's overcome a lot, and they're a very dangerous underdog team right now. I feel like this team going into the postseason, they're hot. They can shock the hockey world and win a series or two, and then who knows what can happen from there. So that's just where I want to start with the Panthers. But with all the things that had to go right for the Panthers tonight to get in, I don't think any of us expected Chicago to pull out a win over Pittsburgh. We just assume guys like Sidney Crosby are going to show up in the big games and carry their team. Gino Malkin did his part. Crosby was kind of neutralized by Jonathan Toews. It felt like this was 2012 all over again or something. It was pretty crazy to see that unfold. But yeah, I mean, watching that game, it was the most excited I've been for a non-Panthers game in quite some time, because we're watching that and it's just like the Hawks they're winning, and then they're still winning in this third period. They've got control of the game somehow, even though it seems like they're just hanging on. Geno Malkin scores, and it's like, oh boy, Pittsburgh, they're coming back now. And then, like you said, Buddy Robinson. I mean, who would have expected that? This is the greatest performance by a Buddy since Buddy the Elf Saved Christmas. I mean, I could not believe what I saw there. And then Greek Lightning scores a goal, and Buddy Robinson's throwing himself in front of shots, blocking shots. You have to credit Chicago tonight for not rolling over and just folding to increase their odds for Bedard. This is a team that they had a lot of pride, and at the end of the day, you get the empty netter from a guy that for years we've kind of despised, Tyler Johnson, a former Tampa Bay Lightning staple. He gets the empty netter, and it's funny how that works out. Just 24 hours ago, John Tavares saved the Islanders, and tonight Tyler Johnson, a longtime Tampa Bay Lightning, is the guy who puts the final nail in the coffin for the Penguins. So hockey's a funny sport, and yeah, we're all big Buddy fans tonight, without a doubt.
No doubt. And it puts the Panthers in a very good position, the position of being in the dance. And it's all you can ask for. It's all you can ask for as far as the opportunity as well. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we're going to discuss more about how the Panthers got here and how we've never been, at least for me, never been happier to get a loser point on Monday night. We're going to talk about that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about Game Time. And buying tickets to your favorite sporting events shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fastest and easiest way to buy tickets for all sports, music, comedy, and theaters near you. With killer deals and last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. And for Game Time, you might want to start getting possibly your Panthers playoff tickets there. Even for the Miami Heat play-in game on Friday night, you might want to go get your play-in tickets for that game as well. So you can use Game Time as far as that. Forget last minute. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals for ticket right up to the date of the event. Get images of your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what you expect when you arrive. Tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you'll never have to dig through your email. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Back on this April 12th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. It is a Winans Wednesday edition of the show, where Jacob Winans is back for a celebratory edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. And it's funny because I wasn't necessarily annoyed or angry at Monday's result, really, at all. Of course, my title for the show was Loss, but still in control for this Panthers team. And we knew there were so many things that could break wrong, that so many things could break right. They were on the right side this week. And there's still a full day before the Panthers even take the ice again. And I want to ask you, have you ever been happier to get a loser point on Monday, looking back at it now?
To be honest with you, no. I mean, thinking back, that was probably the most relief I've ever felt from an overtime loss. Because, going right before that overtime, John Tavares gets a really, really dangerous wraparound, and I'm thinking, oh my God, he did it again.
Barkov too.
Yeah. It scared the hell out of me. I thought Tavares just crushed us again with a wraparound. So when he did end up beating us in overtime, it's still, we control our own destiny. And if it comes down to a win in your in game on Thursday, that's really all you can ask for. A game on home ice to decide your playoff fate, I would have been completely fine with that. So to be completely honest with you, my attention wasn't even fully on the games today until Chicago comes out in the first period and they're like, okay, this is a game. Let me put this on and pay attention. But my mind was completely on Thursday. We did enough to set up this game. Winning, you're in. You can't complain with that. That's everything you want as a player, is to control your own destiny with the game on home ice. So I was fine with the 1 point against Toronto. But honestly, today with the results that happened, it's about time the Panthers get some luck, because this has been a very unlucky season for them, and to have things go their way for once, it was definitely nice.
And let's think about one thing real quick. Think about where the Panthers were in each of the last 4 years going into the postseason. Year number 1 was the COVID bubble. The Panthers were still struggling to find who they were. Under new coaching staff, the core might or might not have plateaued. Sergei Bobrovsky's first year struggled going into that, and of course, it manifested itself in a bad way, getting destroyed by the Islanders. The very next year, of course, COVID is still around. Well, it still is. But as far as going into that season, the 56-game season, and how the Panthers were viewed before, they were seen as a bubble playoff team. Exceeded expectations, get to the second spot, lose in round 1 against the Tampa Bay Lightning in 6, and just a wacky season with facing Carolina, Nashville, Dallas, Chicago, but still exceed expectations, and then that's where you start building the pieces together, trading a Sam Bennett in that trade deadline, Brandon Montour for a 3rd-round pick as well. You start to see it's like you're building a brick house. Cement, put a block there. Cement, another block there. Then there's expectations for this team. All the way to the President's Trophy. Win around for the first time in 26 years. And of course, we knew what happened before that with the buyout of Keith Yandel. There was some cap relief there at the time in order to build that team. And then this was the so-called gap year for the Panthers. You're like this when it comes to the cap. And of course, you mentioned it in segment number 1, where in order to make that Matthew Tkachuk trade work, you had to trade a Mackenzie Weegar. You had to trade a Jonathan Huberdeau, which even if Mackenzie Weegar was still on the Panthers right now, this was likely going to be his last year on the team, because they were likely not going to be able to fit him under the cap after.
Yep.
And you see the aging curve of what can happen to a guy in his late 20s going into 30s. And of course, we saw it with the point production with Huberdeau this year, a 60 some odd point difference. And you just see the different building blocks each and every season for this team. But one thing's a constant. They're in the dance. And it just goes to show the leadership from top to bottom, from the Violas, Matthew Caldwell, now Bill Zito in the mix. And of course, I know Paul Maurice is in year 1 of being the coach, but give him his credit too there. And it's just establishing the leadership and of course, the players doing it on the ice as well, starting with Sasha Barkov, even though Sergei Bobrovsky hasn't played in a few weeks now. But it also starts from top to bottom on how the Panthers got here. And you see the different stories and the different scenarios that the different kind of challenges that this team had to go through each year through their 4 consecutive trips to the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree 100%. What we're talking about here is a kind of a long answer to one word, and that's identity. The Panthers have found an identity. There's an expectation now that the Panthers are a playoff team and they belong there year after year after year. This was a year that, if we're looking at it realistically, as far as the cap goes, this is a year where the Panthers were always going to have the toughest time getting in. The Tkachuk trade, it opens the playoff and Stanley Cup window long-term quite a bit. It keeps that open for a long time. But as far as what it did to the team this season, with Keith Yandel's buyout ballooning this season, and Patrick Hornquist making $5 million, unfortunately suffers a bad injury that's kept him out. But having to do so like the cap gymnastics earlier in the year where we were dressing the team short a skater, or when we had no healthy scratches. This was the year that the Panthers were, if there was a year they weren't going to make it, this was the year they weren't going to make it. And they overcame all of that. And it, like you said, it does go back to some of those building blocks that at the time were pretty frowned upon. Sam Bennett, everybody remembers the heat that Bill Zito took for trading 2 seconds for Sam Bennett. Everyone thought it was a terrible idea, except for a select few of us. And because of his lack of success in Calgary, Brandon Montour at the time was statistically one of the worst defensemen in the NHL playing for Buffalo. But it was Buffalo, and that was a really bad team at the time, and Bill Zito saw something in him. We traded a 3rd-round pick, which, looking back on it, we may not have even made that move if not for Aaron Ekblad's injury, which was horrendous and catastrophic at the time. But it also results in us getting Brandon Montour for pennies on the dollar, which now is paying dividends because we've got him on the blue line and we paid just about nothing for him. So some of those building blocks were put in place and now they're paying off. Bill Zito deserves a ton of credit for that. But like you said, it does boil down to the players. They've established a culture, an identity, and an expectation now that they're a playoff team. They're going to be a playoff team. They have no interest in not being a playoff team. And we know how this works in hockey, where it doesn't really matter how you get in. It doesn't really matter what your team, what you look like in the standings. Hockey is a sport where any number of things can go right or wrong throughout the regular season, especially when it comes down to injuries, chemistry, things like that, where your point total that gets you into the playoffs might not really resemble what you are as a team. It's just about getting there. And I fully believe the Panthers are better than their point total shows. And I think the playoffs are a really great time for that to show itself, because the Panthers are no regular 7 or 8 seed. This is a Panthers team that can beat any team in the NHL in a 7-game series. And personally, I'm very excited to see what they do, because last year I feel like the expectations that came with being the President's Trophy winner kind of got to them, and they played with that over their head. This year, there's no expectations. They are a wild card team that barely scraped in. They're the underdogs. No one expects them to win a thing, and I love that for this team. I think Matthew Tkachuk in particular can take that and run with it, and I think the team will follow him. So I'm very excited to see what they do this season as a massive playoff underdog, no matter who they play in the first round.
Yeah, and I feel like our approach, at least for me personally, and I'm sure a lot of people feel this way, is like, even though playoff hockey, watching it is stressful, I feel like knowing that you're not expected to win, you could watch these games a bit loosely.
Yep, there's nothing to lose.
Versus the previous year, it's like, you won the President's Trophy. Now, there's going to be a lot of conversation around your franchise if you fall short. And of course, we can't forget about how not only losing in the second round last year, but being just flat out embarrassed. 3 goals in 4 games last year. Just the difference that are how we look at this team is almost a calendar year later when it comes to this team. But the no expectations approach and on what this team can do and the possibility of it exceeding it just makes it, the fact that they do win a round this year, even better. And I even said it at the beginning of the year, if they missed the playoffs this year, it was going to cancel out the President's Trophy winning season. But now we don't even have to go that route, and that we can talk about culture and identity for this Florida Panthers team. But we're going to transition over to the third and final segment, where we're going to talk more about the scenarios. Yes, the Florida Panthers have clinched the playoff spot, but there's still a little bit to play for come Thursday night. We're going to discuss this more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Third and final segment on this Wednesday, April 12th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. It's another edition of Winans Wednesday here on the show with my friend Jacob Winans. And Jacob, I tweeted this earlier, but after work tomorrow when I get out, I might take a little bit of a trip to Giordano's to get a little bit of deep dish pizza and in celebration of the Blackhawks doing the Florida Panthers a big favor as far as beating the Pittsburgh Penguins on the road to help the Panthers clinch a playoff spot. So definitely planning on doing that for sure tomorrow. But Jacob, the scenarios look a lot different now, and it's a lot simpler with everything, with the Panthers still having to wait a full day to play again, and the fact that even if the Panthers lose in regulation on Thursday and the Pittsburgh Penguins win in Columbus on Thursday, the Panthers are going to be above the Penguins no matter what. So, wild card one. If the New York Islanders lose in regulation on Wednesday, no matter what happens, regulation loss, overtime loss, or win, if the New York Islanders lose on Wednesday night in regulation and overtime, actually, the Florida Panthers will be wild card one. If the New York Islanders win on Wednesday, right before the Florida Panthers take the ice, they will need at least an overtime loss in order to clinch a spot in. I hold on, doing this real quick. If the New York Islanders win on Wednesday in regulation, the Florida Panthers will need at least a regulation win to still be wild card one. But if the Florida Panthers get an overtime loss while the New York Islanders get a regulation win, the Florida Panthers will be wild card two. So it's a lot simpler. But also, the most important one, if they win, regardless of what happens on Wednesday, the Florida Panthers will be wild card one. So the only possibility that they could be wild card two is if they get a regulation loss or an overtime loss if the Islanders get a regulation win. So it all comes down to, even before taking the ice, whether the Islanders win is regulation or not.
Yep. And I think, honestly, I like the way this is playing out for Florida because it doesn't leave any room for, let's sit guys or rest guys or just wait. No, this is a team. The Panthers are going to play. They're going to play to win because it does have implications. And I think that's everything you want for the Panthers right now. Now, of course, we hope you get out of that game healthy. That's first and foremost. Go into the playoffs healthy, but it's not the most pressure since they've already clinched a spot, but it is still something important to play for because, again, without getting too much into the opponents and stuff, Wildcard 2 plays Boston, who's honestly putting together one of the best regular seasons of this generation. And then, honestly, the best regular season of this generation. They broke that record tonight. So, getting Wildcard 1 is important. Because you could face any number of opponents between wildcard 1 and 2. You could face Boston, Carolina, and Jersey. There's options on the table, and I think everyone is thinking, let's try to avoid Boston if we can. So, win wildcard 1 puts you on the Metro side of the bracket, which honestly the Panthers probably fare better over there, and that's something to play for. So I don't anticipate seeing the Panthers resting guys. Definitely don't anticipate them not taking that game seriously. But at the end of the day, we can watch it with a little less pressure because their fate is decided. They are at least in the top 8, and they're going to get their shot at the cup. But like I said, this is not an ordinary 7 or 8 seed. This isn't like last year's Nashville team who went up against Colorado and was essentially just a practice round for the Avalanche. This is not a team that's going in with no expectation of winning. The Panthers believe in themselves, even though no one else does. And this is a team that could surprise a lot of people. So I think you have to give it your best shot for wild card 1. And at the end of the day, if they end up with wild card 2, I don't look at this season any differently than if they end up with wild card 1. Just getting in is all that matters, and you give whatever team you're lining up against your very best shot come game 1. But with the wild card scenarios, it's interesting because the Panthers will, of course, not host game 1 or 2 of their playoff series, which, for being honest, might be better for them because the Panthers have been allergic to winning a game 1 at home. They're incapable of doing it, apparently. So maybe their luck turns starting a series on the road. It's a team that's been good on the road. And if you can steal a game on the road in a series, Panthers are lethal at home. So you come back home with maybe a 1-1 series, and now you're looking at a completely different series. So I like it. I like starting on the road. I do. So whichever wild card the Panthers end up with, it's going to be an interesting time. But again, we can still watch the Montreal New York game with cheering on some old Panthers faces: Sam Montembeault, Mike Matheson, Mike Hoffman, a bunch of old Panthers over there, and we're hoping they're going to do us a favor.
Yeah, no doubt, and it'll definitely, and of course we could watch that game on Thursday, knowing that if the Habs do the Panthers a favor, that you just have to really look at the game for the New Jersey Devils, which who do the Devils play on Thursday? They play the Capitals on the road.
Yeah.
And of course the Carolina Hurricanes play the Florida Panthers, and once again the Hurricanes have to win outright for them to win the division because they do not own the tiebreaker over New Jersey. So big it's going to be a big game for the Carolina Hurricanes side of things for sure, but it's all going to be dependent on whether that win is in fact in regulation for the New York Islanders.
And another point on that, and this is of course a very likely outcome, is what if the Panthers play Carolina in that final game, and then that ends up being the first round matchup? It very well could happen. So that game, in a game where both teams are expected to play all their regulars, play that game full all out, that could end up being basically a pre-game 1 to a playoff series. So you could be looking at technically an 8-game series potentially with the Carolina Hurricanes. That could definitely make things pretty spicy in round 1 if they're already acquainted from the ending the regular season with each other.
Or if you beat Carolina in regulation and New Jersey wins, you remember what happened in that first matchup between the Panthers and the Devils with the face-off of Nico Hischier.
Already bad blood in that series.
And Matthew Tkachuk going after Hischier after just a week later too, and just revisiting all of that as well for that. And there's a story in every single matchup for this Panthers team in relation to either in either of their matchups. It's either going to be Boston, it's either going to be New Jersey, or it's either going to be Carolina in what as in who's going to be their first round opponent. But
and the good news with all those teams is the Panthers have not looked out of place playing against any of those teams. They've played New Jersey well. They compete with Carolina year in and year out, and they split the season series with Boston. So it's I will keep saying this until game 1, that this is not just a throwaway season. This is a Panthers team that can contend with any of the matchups they see in the first round. They've proven it in the regular season. They can hang with these guys.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And I think that's a great place to end the show, where we still don't have a full picture of where the Panthers are as far as the whole Eastern Conference, but we are one step closer as we are just a few days away from Game 82, and with the postseason starting on Monday. But Jacob, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this celebratory edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, where the Florida Panthers clinch a playoff spot and are in the dance for the fourth consecutive season. Tell everybody where they can follow you online.
Definitely. You can follow me on Twitter at Jacob Winans 8. I'm always active there, especially active tonight, cheering on the Blackhawks. And shout out to our good friend and mentor, Frank Rikas, original Chicago Blackhawks fan. I genuinely hope they get Connor Bedard after doing us this favor tonight. So shout out to Blackhawks fans and the team there, and go buddy.
And the old host, the former host of Locked On Panthers as well. The OG as well. So can't forget that. So the shout out to Frank Rikas there. So Jacob, I want to thank you so much for joining, and of course we'll be texting as always, and I will see you on the show next week.
Can't wait. Thank you.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Steve Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. Now make your second listen of the day. Game to Game NHL. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NHL with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NHL, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. So I'm Armando Velez with Jacob Winans, and you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.